Hi there, this is Leslie Vernick. I'm the author of the books The Emotionally Destructive Relationship and The Emotionally Destructive Marriage. And if you've listened to the videos that I've sent you in the last couple of days, I just want to thank you. I trust that they've been helpful for you, but I also want you to know that I've heard from you, hundreds of you, about what you feel is the most challenging thing about living with a destructive spouse. And one of the things I've heard loud and clear is that you're afraid. You're afraid of speaking up, and you're afraid of not speaking up. You're afraid of the future. You're afraid of what people will think of you if you leave. And you're afraid of what people will think of you if you continue to stay and do nothing. You're afraid of what's going to happen to your children if you leave. And you're afraid of what's going to happen to your children if you stay. You're afraid of your financial future. You're afraid for your safety. You're afraid that God's going to be angry with you if you give up hope that your spouse can or will change. I hear you. You're afraid. So I just want to share some final thoughts with you about fear. Because fear can become a prison, and many of you live in the prison of fear rather than the freedom of faith. Fear is meant to warn us something's wrong. Sometimes what's wrong is that you are in real physical danger, and the smartest thing that you need to do is pay attention to your fear and take appropriate action. To do nothing isn't going to make things better. And sometimes we're only motivated to change when the pain of staying the same is greater now than the fear of making the change into the unknown future. But the change is scary, and you need help and support and wisdom. If you're in a dangerous situation, in other words, you've experienced physical abuse in your marriage, or your husband has threatened to harm you, himself, or your children, or you're afraid that might happen if you try to change things, you need to get safe. But before you separate or even speak up to your spouse, please contact an expert in this area. You can receive free help from a domestic violence hotline, and their number is 1-800-799-SAFE. 1-800-799-SAFE. And you'll talk to someone there who will walk you through a safety plan to get you and your children safe. This is so important. Please don't neglect this, especially if you've had any history of violence in the past. Leaving a destructive spouse may escalate this danger for you. Leaving is sometimes the most dangerous thing that you can do. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it does require that you do it with wisdom and help. But some of our other fears of what might happen if we do something are sort of like boogeymen that scare the daylights out of us and keep us paralyzed. Fear lies to you. We've all heard the acronym, fear is false evidence appearing real. And this boogeyman of fear can keep you stuck, frozen, and disabled from taking the appropriate action. Let me give you an example. If you found a lump in your breast today, you might immediately fear cancer, or you might even fear death. But to avoid these fears and ignore the lump doesn't make your risk of cancer or dying less. It actually makes it greater. Until you face your fear by finding out what's wrong and taking appropriate action, in other words, walking towards your fear, will you have the best chance of beating cancer and death. So I want to give you 4 things that you can do to face your fear. First, name it. What exactly are you most afraid of? And what do you need to do to face that fear? Courage, which is something you lack, is not the absence of fear, but it's gaining the strength to walk toward your fear, even while you still fear it. Second, I want you to talk about your fear with some people who can help you face them and walk through them. Now, if you can't afford professional help or you're not comfortable talking with people in your church, there are online groups you can contact or telephone hotlines you can call. The Domestic Violence Hotline is one, your local domestic abuse shelter or women's advocacy group is another, and you can find those numbers online or in the blue pages of an old-fashioned phone book. Conquer is a support group I offer, which can be a place for you to gain courage, find some safety, and learn wisdom about how to face your fears. Walking through scary times is not something that you have to do alone. We all need people in our life who we trust, who believe our story, so that we can get the help we need to make the changes we know we need to make. So get some support. Ask for some help. There are places and people who will help you get out of your jail of fear. Conquer is one. Not the only one, but I only remind you of this because our group will be closed to new members after midnight Saturday night. Please don't email me in the following weeks wondering why you can't get in. We've grown tremendously in our first year, and I closed the group in between opening it twice a year to just help everybody get to know each other better, and for me to love on them, and for us to help each other get stronger before we get too big. And so Conquer will not be accepting any new members after Saturday until 6 months later. I don't want you to miss out because you're sitting on the fence, afraid to make a decision that will help yourself grow. Third, it's important to face your fear and take responsibility of your life. This is something that you're going to have to learn. As women, sometimes we've been groomed to wait for someone to come along to rescue us. Prince Charming, the pastor, the counselor, the person who's going to come along and finally fix your life. There is no such person. God has given you the responsibility to steward your life, and while you're a mom, to some degree, your children's life. You're in charge of how your life is going, both inside your own head and inside your four walls. If it's unhealthy, dangerous, toxic, what are you doing to change things, including perhaps leaving the environment? In my book, The Emotionally Destructive Marriage, I talk about building core strength, internal strength, and one of those components is understanding that you're accountable and responsible for your own life. No one else but you is. And last, in order to face your fear, you must answer this question. Who do you listen to most? Are you listening to fear or listening to God? The Bible repeatedly tells us, fear not, don't be afraid. Why? Because God knows we're fearful creatures, and that life sometimes scares the bejeebies out of us. Most of you are very tired of living in your destructive marriage, and some of you are ready to make a serious attempt at real change. On the other hand, you're very afraid that the change you desire won't occur, and by standing up to Him or separating, things could actually get worse. The psalmist said, "My soul has dwelt too long with one who hates peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war." You're afraid if you take action to make a change, it won't result in more peace, but more drama, more hatred, more conflict, and you might be right. Just because you finally take a stand and say, I didn't sign up for a slave-master relationship, doesn't mean that your husband will be willing to move toward a more mutual marriage. As long as he's the master and you're willing to be the slave, it sort of works for him. But here's what I want you to know. God designed marriage to be a mutual, loving, and respectful relationship, not a slave-master one. And because that is God's will for marriage, know that He is on the side of the oppressed when one person takes power over another and uses words or money or physical force or even the scriptures to dominate and control you. When you choose to respectfully speak up against injustice and oppression in a marriage, or anywhere else for that matter, I want you to know that God's on your side. If your spouse refuses to listen, the gift of consequences can be a painful but helpful reminder that he doesn't reap the benefits of a good marriage when he continues to sow discord, deceit, and selfishness. But it's true, when one person receives painful consequences, often the entire family also suffers, and that's what you fear, rightly so. So I think the next step you'll need to ask yourself in this whole process is, do you want to continue to live in fear, or do you want to live in faith? Whether you think it's wise to leave or stay, are you going to live in faith that God knows your story? Faith that God is bigger than your story? Faith that God has a plan for your life and He is a helper in times of trouble? And then, when you walk through that valley of the shadow of death, you will fear no evil, because He is with you. Are you going to live in faith that even though you don't know the future, you're not supposed to? Therefore, you won't know what will happen when you do the right thing. Sometimes it turns out great, and sometimes it doesn't. But that's not your fault. It's just that you don't have control over what another person chooses to do with the truth or their own pain. It's interesting to me that the psalmist says two things in Psalm 56. The first one is, I will trust God, so why should I be afraid? What can mere mortals do to me? And then in the same psalm, he says, when I'm afraid, I will trust God. There are times our faith is so big we don't feel fear. And other times we're so filled with fear, we're going to be overwhelmed by it if we don't trust God. So friend, if you want to walk through your fear and face it, first, name it. Second, get some support. Third, take responsibility for your life and how it's going. Center yourself in God's love, His word, His promises, His strength. He will give you the courage and wisdom to do the right thing at the right time. You're not in charge of the results. But what you can do is either walk forward by faith or cower in fear. I pray you choose faith, even when you still feel afraid. God bless, and I hope to see you in Conquer.